I personally do not know much about the Asian theater in World War II. I do know that the Japanese controlled this at the start, something like that. And that the Japanese had something that they like to call honor, but everyone else called maniac suicide, where they just pretty much killed themselves, and the civilians also killed themselves just to try and not be dishonorable. And dishonorable was having the enemy push like an inch. Yeah, they weren't very good at living. But you can be better proof that you were better than the Japanese in World War II. And do anti-suicide and anti-depression stuff. You can be better than them. Inspirational quotes from random history. Yay. But the Japanese also, I'm outside trying to be away from the chaos of in my house, and keeps landing on a bug keeps landing on my screen. But I know that at the end of World War I, they took control of Manchukuo, Mingchang and Manchukuo, or Manchuria, from the Chinese. And the Chinese ended up fracturing into like 200 different warlords. That is an over-exaggeration coming from someone who doesn't know how many warlords there were, and also doesn't feel like looking it up. All you need to know is that they collapsed into a bunch of warlords, and were even internally divided between the Chinese Communist Party, yes, the one that leads China now, and the old Kuomintang, which was humiliated by the Japanese and really not very popular by the Chinese people. Okay, bugs keep landing on my screen, probably because I'm also doing this at like 9:25, like 9:30, so it's like the only bright thing in the entire backyard. So, yeah, they're landing all over it. But back to the video. So the Chinese are quite weak, even internally divided. I also want to mention the Long March, where Chinese communists were encircled, so they just left and moved north. The Chinese communists were super like, we're gonna just go to the war with Japan. But the Kuomintang were like, we're not ready for a war with Japan. They weren't ready for a war with Japan. And as you can see by this map, they got naval invaded a lot and stuff like that. But also, the Japanese saw what was happening in Europe and were like, we can go on a rampage. But we also know that we don't want to go to war with the Soviets, so let's sign a non-aggression pact. This non-aggression pact means that even during Operation Barbarossa, the Japanese just don't attack the Soviets. But they do attack the Americans. That's not a circle. They do attack the Americans because the Americans and the Allies were shutting them out of all of the resources down here. There are a lot of resources there, like rubber, mainly rubber, but other stuff too. And they have there's no oil in this entire area. There's probably no oil, I'm pretty sure. So in other words, the Japanese are starved of oil and really need other resources like rubber, because there's literally none on the home islands. So when they go rampaging, they take I know that they take like Indonesia and stuff, but they don't take the Philippines because that's an American possession due to the Spanish-American War. Jeez, what did I do? Jeez, it can only be so bad. But yeah, probably something like that. Yeah, something like that. And then they later took French Indochina, probably after the fall of France or something. And they also pressured Thailand to join them, but that's a little bit later, after they decide that they need to invade the British Raj. But back to the Americans. The Americans are shutting them out of oil, so they launched the invasion of Pearl Harbor, which I'm pretty sure the invasion of Pearl Harbor was based on Americans recruit or soldier or whatever. They wanted to prove that Pearl Harbor was not invincible, so they did like a fake run with like a flour bag or something, and then from like the north, which then the Japanese did that and just copied from the north. But I'm not entirely sure. Pretty sure I only heard that once, so it's probably not true. But you can always look it up. Even if you don't think these videos are going to tell you everything, it can at least tell you what to look up. But the Americans, they failed to hit the American oil or all of the American ships in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. So the Americans are just able to build a lot more and go island hopping to reach one island, to then get enough range to reach the next, then the next, then the next, then the next. And I'm pretty sure there's one plan to go south and then north. Then there's another plan to just island hop and go north. Wait, let me just get rid of all these lines. They're starting to mess everything up. Okay, so you know that by now, 1942, Japan probably owned all the orange stuff. See, it says extent. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a widely used map of World War II Japan. There's one plan that the Allies were going to go, that America was going to go like that. And there's another plan that they were going to go like that. One free the Philippines, one attack the Japanese home islands. I'm pretty sure both were done. It was probably more of like a mix of, like, it's probably like both. I'm pretty sure. Like some did it one way, some did it the other. But as also with Pearl Harbor, they also captured the Philippines. And the Australians defended themselves. I don't know. I'm mentioning this because it's information. But the Australians defended themselves with what looked like a shed on a tank, or a shed on a tractor or whatever, that they called a tank. And they called it the Bob Semple tank. It really wasn't a good tank, but it was the only main thing that they could produce, because I feel like Australia is, like, it's always going to be, like, not as populated as, like, everywhere else, so. But they are able to defend themselves. The Americans are able to island hop. Even with Thailand, they don't push that much into the British Raj, because the British Raj had defenses and stuff like that. And then later, when the U.S. occupied Okinawa, I don't know how many of them. They already island hopped, like, no, there was a Battle of Iwo Jima. Then they controlled, like, a lot of territories in the Pacific. Like, they had to get to them all because they couldn't reach from, like, here to here. So they had to more, like, reach from there to there and then there to there, because, like, their planes couldn't go that far. Then Okinawa, instead of doing a costly naval invasion of Japan and having the civilians murder themselves and a bunch of Japanese troops, like, vigorous defending their territory to the death, they just decide to nuke it using the Manhattan Project. The Chinese I don't even know if they pushed back at all, but I know that the Soviets did a three-pronged offensive, which was the last major offensive in World War II, which I've heard. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I heard. Soviets prepared an attack there into Manchuria. They ended up pushing so far that they got into North Korea, which then they established North Korea and gave all their takings to the Chinese Communist Party, which is one of the main reasons, along with Soviet support, why the Chinese Communists won the Civil War and ended up pushing the Kuomintang, or the Nationalist Chinese, into Taiwan. The Nationalist Chinese only turned democratic in like the 80s. I don't know why we supported them for so long. But then again, we didn't like the communists. Well, we don't like communists. Japan got nuked, and even two nukes, they probably weren't fully committed to surrendering. But then Hirohito, the leader of Japan, noticed that all of their territory was getting destroyed, and they had to surrender. So they surrendered. The Soviets set up North Korea, leading up to the Korean War. Japan was puppeted by solely the Americans. Soviets got South Sakhalin back, which is probably unimportant. And Japan, to talk about Japan's atrocities to the Chinese in World War II, just know that I'm pretty sure they experimented on people to know when the human body goes into hypothermia. And on top of other things like diseases and stuff, which was horrible. But now, to the post-war era, with the Chinese, failing to capture Taiwan in their civil war, and North Korea versus South Korea. North Korea ends up pushing that much till the U.S. comes back in, pushes way north. But then the Chinese communists are like, we do not want them on our border, so they push them back. Douglas MacArthur is like, what if we make a sea of irradiated cobalt and nuke the entire Chinese North Korean border so that the Chinese can't move their troops to us? But then he's fired because that's just absolutely ridiculous. But the Chinese still pushed them back, and now we're at where we are today. And here's where the domino theory comes in. Vietnam, which I cannot draw correctly, just know that they're pretty much just the coast here. Vietnam. Chinese, I don't know why, but they try and invade Vietnam, but the Vietnamese do guerrilla warfare, pretty much that they hide behind literally every tree, or in every tree, or under the ground, literally everywhere, and just pretty much, like, if someone's playing Fortnite and they build an entire maze, and then are just on every corner that you turn, you run the risk of someone popping out of the crease of the wall and shooting you down once you've turned your body, and shooting behind you. It's pretty much guerrilla warfare in a nutshell, but instead of corners and buildings and stuff, it's buildings, yes, but also tunnels and bushes and trees. But the North Vietnamese, which were communist and for some reason not liked by the Chinese, just invaded through Laos and Cambodia, attacked South Vietnam by the side. The Americans at first just bombed the heck out of North Vietnam. Oh, also, after Japan surrendered, it was the end of World War II. I'm just talking a little bit about the Cold War, from the Korean War to the Vietnam War. The North Vietnamese just attacked from on the side through Laos and Cambodia, like I just said. And then the U.S. are like, well, just bombing the heck out of them isn't working. Let's send troops there to train the southern Vietnamese to fight back. The southern Vietnamese still don't fight back very well, so the U.S. also kind of attacks, but they don't want to have the same thing in the Korean War where the Chinese just invade them and push them back, so they don't actually do very much offenses, especially since the Vietnamese also, not only did they build massive fortifications and massive underground networks, they also made a lot of traps in the land, killing literally everyone. But yeah, that's a little bit about that's all I need to say. Goodbye.